Within the context of trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police being low, and the sort of urgent need that is recognised by the new Commissioner to rebuild trust and confidence, the perceptions around the Prevent programme are, potentially a problem. We heard from Brendan Cox at our last meeting that there's a perception there's a higher level of distrust in Prevent amongst the Muslim community, and there's a perception that it has been targeted not on terrorism but on Muslims. Now, whether that's fair or not, that perception has existed, and so the need to rebuild trust and confidence is really important. So how is the Met, so this would be for Richard and Helen, how is the Met helping to address those negative perceptions around Prevent?
Thank you. So yes, it's right to say there are some negative perceptions around Prevent, although a lot of the research has shown that those perceptions are not held by everyone. There's a whole range of views around Prevent. I think one of the things that most commentators would agree was if you don't have Prevent, you probably need to replace it with something that aims to do exactly the same, which is to prevent vulnerable people being drawn into radicalisation, to being radicalised and being drawn into terrorism, and either coming to harm themselves or causing harm to others. So the core tenet to it, the purpose of it, I think most people are in agreement with. A lot of it is about delivery, and you are right to say that community confidence is a critical element of that. One of the things that we look very closely at is the level of referrals that we receive into our Prevent services, and also where those referrals are coming from. One of our key concerns through the pandemic, of course, was that professionals were no longer getting face-to-face time with young people, and therefore were less likely to be able to spot signs of radicalisation and so on. I think there is the onus is on us to communicate what Prevent is all about. It is true that some referrals do ultimately result in individuals being investigated for terrorism offences, but it's important to note that is a tiny minority of the total referrals that are received, circa 1%. The vast majority of people who are referred into Prevent, we are able to help and move onto pathways away from radicalisation, either through policing or with partners. And I think it's really important that we seek to get that message out there. Policing has a role to play in that messaging, of course. On our local operations teams do a great deal of work both through schools and into local partnerships as well. And then there's a role, of course, for our neighbourhoods teams in the wider Met. And I mentioned earlier how important it is that counter-terrorism police are drawn from local forces. I think this is an area where there's a real opportunity and strength in that we're not a separate agency, we're not detached, we're the same organisation as those officers and staff on neighbourhood teams, and they are at the very forefront of this engagement. We now have I think last count 1,300, we're aiming to have 1,500 Prevent champions in our local policing teams. We've seen increases in referrals as a result, and I think as well as those numbers, what's really important to me is it means that we've got officers who are in contact with the public every day, who understand Prevent and can speak knowledgeably about what it is really about, and to encourage people who are best placed to see the signs of radicalisation, i.e. family members, parents and so on, to feel confident in reporting to us. But I don't pretend this is easy, and you're right to say that trust and confidence in policing has an impact on Prevent in the same way as it has an impact on all of policing. We police in the UK by consent, and that means we must have trust and confidence in place.
Yeah, I mean that the sort of, I suppose the risk is that it feels like a form of state surveillance, and so that community work that you're talking about seems like a route to make sure that Prevent is about safeguarding and protecting young people from being drawn into radicalisation, rather than exposing young people drawn into radicalisation and criminalising them, their children.
I think that's right. There's a lot of discussion about the number of younger people we're now seeing drawn into our casework across all ideologies, and I think that gives us an opportunity to talk about Prevent. We take the opportunity every time we can, but also for other partners to talk about Prevent, and exactly as you've described, to say this is about protecting our young people. Young people are vulnerable to influence, perhaps more so than older people, although there are people with complex needs throughout the Prevent system, old and young, but young people are at that particular risk, and I think it's inherent on all of us to talk positively about caring for young people, and to highlight that this is a safety issue, and this is about the safety of the young person. The earlier we can intervene, the more successful we will collectively be in keeping them safe from harm and preventing them from going down a very dangerous route. And I'm pleased that we now have partners, including Blue Light partners, who are also leaning in, and Jonathan referenced earlier the work that the LFB are doing around Prevent as well. But this is a collective effort to land that message that Prevent is there to keep people safe.
Mm-hmm. So the Shawcross review of Prevent, which I think has been with the Home Office for quite a while, and is expected to be published this year. What would you like to see in that Shawcross review when it eventually gets published? What would be helpful in terms of protecting young people in particular? So
I think I'll wait to see the report, but I'll just, if I can just wind back to my previous comments, I think it's inherent on all of us to talk about Prevent and the work it does to keep people safe, and to be really, really clear about what the purpose of the P for Prevent in the contest strategy, and let's remember this is a significant part of our counter-terrorism strategy in this country is Prevent, and to be really, really clear that is about preventing people being drawn into terrorism, preventing other individuals from seeking to radicalise others, and ultimately to keep not just the public safe from terrorists, but to keep vulnerable people safe from being drawn into this. So it is very much a safeguarding issue, and I think I would hope that when any commentator talks about Prevent, they keep that very much to the fore.
And do you think that because the other piece is those community partners? So you've got schools, you've got local authorities generally. I mean, last summer I was contacted by various people who'd seen a letter that was sent out by the Metropolitan Police that was meant to be sent out by all schools to parents before the summer holidays, but actually I found it very difficult to find any examples of schools that had actually sent that letter out to parents. Some had, but there were an awful lot that hadn't. Do you think that the relationship between the Met and Prevent and schools is working effectively?
I think I would be foolish to comment and say clearly yes or clearly no. I think when you think about the complexity of the city and the number of different institutions we're talking about when we talk about education, they are manifold, and this is going to be highly localized. I think in some places that's going to be working very well, in other places less so. It's inherent on us, I think, to be open to the conversation with the education sector about what works well for them, to understand the other pressures on them, because there is so much, rightly, so much focus on keeping young people safe from a whole host of risks, and so much emphasis placed on the role of education in this. So I do understand that they have a huge amount of pressure on them, but I think it's inherent on us on having those conversations, understanding what works for them. Mm-hmm. We know we've got some interventions that have been very successful, and working with individuals who've got much more, so Humza, for example, has got much more grasp of young people. He's a social media influencer, I suppose I'll describe him as. He's working really closely with us, and that's been a really successful intervention on the prevent side, but it's not everywhere. And I think that's the key, that it's a complex sector, and we need to be open to having conversations about what's going to work for them and what is not, and the pressures that they face. And it's going to be different in every part of London. We know that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Just going back to the Shawcross review, I was expecting there to be people to be hoping to see some of the things that have come out in the Harris review, like more money for the NHS and the MPS actually to deliver on prevent, more about data sharing from the NHS, and possibly also better communication between prisons and local authorities, and BCUs and local authorities. Does anyone want to comment on any of those points that came up in the Harris review in relation to prevent working better?
Yeah, so in an overarching sense, I think we're hoping that the review includes recommendations which will bring about improvements to the prevent system. I think some of the things that you've mentioned there would absolutely do that. I think to Commander Smith's point, we'd probably like to see some reference to the success that Prevent has had. I think that's very important. We talk a lot about opposition to Prevent, and sometimes get sucked into discussions about whether the cohort that is opposed to Prevent is larger or smaller than it might be, and to some extent that might be a red herring in itself, because actually what we really need to have happen to make Prevent effective is for more people to understand the indicators of radicalisation concerns, more people to know where help and support can be sought, and more people to know what that does and doesn't look like. So that's a cohort that need awareness raising, not necessarily movement from a opposed position to an engaged position. We're very disappointed that we haven't seen the Harris review. I remember joining MOPAC in 2019, and the Mayor looking to call for an independent review of Prevent, and we were rather gazumped by the government at that point. That was a nice gazumping actually, and we welcomed it, but I don't think any of us would have expected that 4 years on we wouldn't have seen the culmination of that report. I think that's frustrating for us. It's probably frustrating for the reviewer. It's probably frustrating for civil servants who are working on it. I don't think necessarily the independent review is going to move people who are vehemently opposed to Prevent. I think we've seen a lot of opposition reported around boycotts of that review, so I don't think we can expect it to do that. Hopefully we can expect it to provide some recommendations around system changes in the Prevent system, which we would look to support and endorse. In terms of funding and increased funding, which I think is called for in the Harris review, I wouldn't expect a lot around increased funding coming from central government at the moment. Those are the noises that we hear. We would be disappointed if funding was to decrease. In terms of Prevent delivery in London, I'm sure colleagues would agree with us on that. Thank you.
And do you think the Met should be the lead agency for the delivery of Prevent, or do you think it should sit in a sort of cross-cutting way between all the different partners?
There are many, many reasons why the Met should be at the forefront of looking after a safeguarding from radicalisation programme, and Commander Smith can speak more succinctly to those, but there are many, many important reasons. But as people have talked about it being a team sport. We always consider it to be a shared endeavour. And so to be most effective in protecting people from radicalisation, we have to have a whole society approach to it. So everybody has a role to play. That's organisational, but practitioners, or even citizens. We all have a role to play. So it's definitely a shared endeavour. But there are really, really important reasons why I think that it's critical that MPS are leading some components of that system.
Richard, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think on a couple of levels, I do think the Met are the right agency to take a lead role in Prevent. Wider than Counter-Terrorism, Children and Social Work Act of 2017. which places policing as part of the triumvirate of agencies responsible for the safeguarding of young people. So we already have very clear legal statutory obligations around safeguarding, which includes prevention of radicalisation, and then taking that into the very specific world of counter-terrorism policing. As I said, it's one of the 4 building blocks of the counter-terrorism strategy. It would certainly build an additional challenge for me in delivering safety for London if prevent and the other pursue, protect and prepare elements of the strategy were separated in any way. So I think a very firm place for policing within prevent, and at the moment while I recognise the challenge that you raised on trust and confidence, I don't think that is sufficient reason to start separating prevent away from policing, and in fact I think it's a very good reason why we should keep prevent and continue to work hard with our community engagement and understanding to make it work.
And that community engagement, does that include specific engagement with young people and organisations representing young people? Because I think they're sort of over 50% or around 50% of prevent referrals, and so it's important that their voice is heard in this debate.
And as I've said earlier, the younger cohort is really key here. There's a lot of discussion not just around prevent, but in our pursue casework, where we are seeing younger people who are committing terrorist offences, or there are allegations around terrorist offences for us to investigate, and we are working very hard to look at the complex needs of those individuals and the most appropriate way to address their potential offending, or certainly their route to it. I don't think it's an easy area to separate. I think there's a very clear role for policing, but I think the focus on young people and keeping them safe from terrorism and the additional very specific risks that they face is something that we should keep in very clear view.
And are you alert to issues around neurodiversity? There was the child Rhiannon Rudd who got referred for extremism and then sadly died by suicide, and they were a neurodiverse young person. Is neurodiversity something that is within your thinking around prevent referrals and response to those?
Absolutely yes. Is the short answer. Mental illness we're seeing in our casework, neurodiversity specifically, and neurodiversity across the casework, not just in young people, but with younger people, and we have project work in place to increase our understanding, because actually even within the bracket where we're describing neurodiversity, there's huge granularity of that, and it's important for us to really understand that clearly and understand what interventions may work for the safety and the well-being of the individual, as well as the kind of wider public safety mission that we have. So a firm yes.
Thank you very much. And my final question is for the Fire Brigade. Jonathan, can you just give us a brief update on your rollout of online training to help firefighters identify signs of radicalisation and other counter-terror risks? And how are you ensuring that your training aligns with police counter-terrorism standards and guidance, particularly around these issues I've been raising about vulnerability?
I think just to take your second question first, if I may. So we've got a local prevent lead within London Fire Brigade who works very closely with colleagues in Richard's team to make sure that that is exactly what's happening, to make sure any training that we're rolling out to our staff is completely aligned with the national and local prevent work that's being done by the Metropolitan Police, specifically in this case. As far as the training for firefighters is concerned, so we're launching very shortly, actually, hopefully by the end of this month, if not early February, a new home fire safety visit strategy. Because obviously our main prevention work that we do from a fire perspective in terms of keeping people safe in their homes is obviously the home fire safety visits that our fire crews will do to sometimes some of our most vulnerable members of society. And what firefighters get at the moment is a safeguarding awareness package, you know, predominantly around potential signs of domestic abuse and child abuse, so they're trained to make sure that they've got that awareness for when they're doing home fire safety visits. But we will be including within that new strategy, and that will be rolled out over the course of the next year, signs and symptoms of radicalisation to make sure that we're able to pick that up. And this goes back to the point, it's actually picked up in the Harris review, that we've obviously had a long history of prevention work as far as fire reduction is concerned, and other forms of rescue work to try and bring that down. And actually that's right and proper that we use that knowledge and understanding to try and do our part in the prevent space, because as we've talked about before, this is very much a multi-agency approach. You know, the London Fire Brigade and fire services more broadly obviously have the opportunity to sometimes get into communities that other agencies can't do, and we're doing that as part of our broader prevention work anyway. So actually it makes complete sense to try and bring that capability to the de-radicalisation world, and actually, as Richard's alluded to, we view this very much as a safeguarding issue. And it's about actually using the eyes and ears that we're able to bring in terms of our day-to-day work to help in the prevent space.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.